Our final lesson in Chapter 2 is all about energy. So, energy is the ability to do work or cause change. It is never created, nor is it ever destroyed in chemical reactions. It is merely transformed. So, for example, ice changing into its liquid water form is through the process of absorbing energy from surrounding matter. There are different types of energy. One type of energy is thermal energy. Thermal energy is the total energy of all the particles in an object, and it always flows from warmer matter to cooler matter. And note that I underlined warmer to cooler. Temperature is the measure of the average energy of random motion of particles of matter. So, when we're talking about thermal energy, we're talking about how fast the particles are moving inside of an object. A solid will have its particles vibrating in place, whereas a gas will have its particles moving very quickly, bouncing off of each other, and that's why the particles are spread out further. There are two types of thermal change. One is called endothermic change. And you can see here that I've drawn arrows pointing inward. And that is to demonstrate that an endothermic change is one in which change occurs when energy is taken in, so ice melting. Remember, temperature and thermal energy always flows from warmer matter to cooler matter. So, ice melting is occurring because of an endothermic change. The air that's around the ice is actually warming the particles in the ice, causing them to begin to move faster. An exothermic change is a change in which energy is released. So I drew a picture of a little log fire with arrows pointing out. And that is to demonstrate that the process of an exothermic change is one in which energy is released. So that's why you can warm your fingers over a fire. There's also chemical energy. Chemical energy is energy stored in the chemical bonds between atoms. So some examples of that are food and gasoline. Bonds are broken and new bonds are formed in the process of transforming chemical energy. So when you eat food, you're actually breaking down chemical bonds, releasing energy which your body uses, and forming new bonds. Electromagnetic energy is energy that travels through space as waves. And some examples that we experience are visible light and radio waves. Finally, electrical energy is the energy of electrically charged particles moving from one place to another. So you can think about electricity, what powers lights, your television, and ultimately the iPads that you're probably listening to this video on right now. So let's take the time to draw some pictures that remind us of the four main types of energy. First, for thermal, I have drawn fire to remind myself that thermal energy is related to heat, but I also wrote the word cold. I wrote it in blue to remind me of cold being the absence of heat. I drew an apple to demonstrate chemical energy because that is one of the examples. Food is an example of chemical energy. I drew electromagnetic energy by drawing a picture of the sun because we're not physically touching the sun, but we do feel its heat. And the way that we do that is because its electromagnetic energy, the visible light we see, travels through space as waves. And then I also drew a radio because sound waves travel to us through waves. And finally, for electrical, I drew little e's, and those are standing for electrically charged particles that are moving from one place to another in different directions. And we'll talk more about how that occurs later on. In addition to acknowledging the different types of energy that we will discuss in this year, we also need to acknowledge that energy, because it is neither created nor destroyed, rather simply transformed, we need to talk about the process of transforming energy. And an example is the process of photosynthesis, which we know is something that occurs in plants. So we begin. And in my picture, I drew the sun, and I drew these squiggly waves to represent the electromagnetic energy that travels from the sun to the earth. And underneath here, we know that it's electromagnetic energy from the sun. We know that that electromagnetic energy that travels as visible light occurs and ultimately is transformed into chemical energy as plants make molecules of sugar through the process of photosynthesis. So here I drew the sun to remind me that the electromagnetic energy is traveling through waves, but I drew a tree with apples, and here I am climbing up the tree. Doesn't look like the safest ladder, and I'll pick that apple, and as soon as I eat it, it is transformed ultimately in this final box into a different form of chemical energy. So I drew a picture here of me eating the apple. We will discuss energy in many ways throughout the units in this year of physical science, but to begin with, this is how we will approach the ideas of the four main types of energy and the process of transforming energy. What is very important is to remember that through chemical reactions and bonding, energy is never created or destroyed. It is simply transformed.